name is Jane Fulton, and I am a junior at Yarmouth High School. Patrick Arnold is a community developer and entrepreneur. After traveling the world as a merchant marine, he settled in Portland with his wife in 2007. Together, they started Solely DG, a company focused on business development in an effort to increase Maine's prominence in the global shipping sector and to bridge the gap between water-based and land-based industries. Solely DG has partnered with IMSCIP, the Maine Port Authority, Bristol Seafood, MDI Biological Laboratory, and the University of New England. Arnold has also founded the New England Ocean Cluster in 2014, which aims to connect people, locally and internationally, within the ocean economy and encourage an innovative and sustainable approach to pursuing economic opportunity. Please welcome to the stage Patrick Arnold.
Good morning. I don't know if I'm going to stay behind the podium or wander, so in fact, let me get the mic so that I have the option to vote.
Can you move the mic stand so it's not right in the middle?
Yes, ma'am. Excellent. Well, thank you all for being here, but I want to first say thank you to Ben and his cohort. Ben's the reason I'm here. I was sort of stunned, taken aback. I don't know what I expected from high school students. It was curious to me that a high school student was reaching out on LinkedIn to friend me. And I don't know that I accepted the first friend request because I just wasn't sure what to do there. But then I got phone calls and emails from him, and I sort of put the dots together. And when I talked to him, it was so professional. And it was really interesting. I loved the idea behind this day of hope. But it was remarkable to me just how present he was. And I asked him a few questions just because I wanted to, test this out, and he was so clear with his answers. If you were on the market, then I probably would have hired you right there. But education is a good thing to continue to pursue. So before I begin, I just want to say just what a remarkable presentation that was. And it was one note I just wrote down was how remarkable it is the small bit of the right stuff at the right time makes so much difference. And for me, just that little absence of glucose and oxygen in just the right prenatal moment is profound. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm going to use that as a metaphor for the rest of my life. Because in my experience, a small bit of the right stuff at the right time, just a tiny bit, and to the right person, makes all the difference. And you can look at it from an investment capital perspective, or you can look at it from a love perspective in terms of the love that you invest in another human being at the right point in their life. Just a small bit can make all the difference. I also wrote down a note about the brain studying itself. What a selfish thing to do. Self-consumed. When Ben was opening up, he talked about selflessness, and I've got to say, let me just turn this way just in case it's getting feedback. I've got to agree that selflessness, in my experience, has and is the core to threading a community together. I was a very selfish kid, and my pride and my ego would have me believe that I stopped being selfish sometime through high school. But that was very cunning, because I don't know that I ever stopped being selfish, to be honest, until recently. I have 3 children, a loving wife, and I have to apologize in advance, because after I speak, I must leave. Today's our 12-year anniversary, and I hope she likes what I got her. But we're going to be stealing away for an overnight without our 3 children. That also gives me hope. But yeah, so I, my brain works in a funny way. I'm all over the place. If I were raised today, I'd probably be diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. I do remember my middle school guidance counselor suggesting to my parents that I was hopeless and that I needed to go to the vocational school. And I remember touring the vocational school at the time, which was really under-resourced, and I didn't want to be associated with it. What that did for me in my life was provided probably the first resentment that I used as fuel. Not something I recommend, by the way, okay? But kids carry their insecurities and their fears more on their sleeve than we as adults do. I admire that in children. My heart also breaks when they receive one of those traumas. I put up a proverbial middle finger to folks who would say that I wasn't going to cut it in the world of academia. So I started by saying, well, academia is not for me. But I set out to prove people wrong, whether it was my parents or my guidance counselor or whomever. And so, in South Portland High School, where I grew up, became president of the student government and captain of the cross-country team and track and did band, was leading the school musical, and my grades were fine. I got a 90, grade point average, I guess. Enough to get into the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy down at Kings Point, New York. But I was really driven to be proving folks wrong. And that bitter root of resentment, it can drive you, okay? But this is my first point about hope. I'll introduce myself a little further in a second, but I want to start right here. Hope for a long time for me has been something I have confused with goals. Something I've confused with ambition. Something I've confused with desire. Like, I desire to have a wife and a family. I desire to make X amount of money. I desire to have a home or buy a house on the lake, because that is the main way of life. That's not hope. That is a cunning disguise for ambition or selfishness or a variety of things. Even setting career goals, that's not hope. And you can achieve a lot of those things, which I have in my life, being sort of driven by selfish ambition. I didn't think it was selfish. I thought I was providing for my family. I thought I was achieving the goals that the guidance counselors in life would say, this is the correct path for you. You go to college, you get a job, you achieve something, you do this. I can just tell you from my story and my experience, you can do all that without hope. You can do all of that without real selfless love, too. And doing it that way doesn't give me hope for myself or for society. So, back to Ben's point about selflessness. I want to talk about a few stories that do give me hope. And that have taught me how to think more selflessly, how to overcome the default in my brain of my pride and my ego, which can be deafening. Again, my name is Patrick Arnold. I graduated from South Portland High School and went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and then if you go to a Merchant Marine Academy like Maine Maritime Academy, the goal is to ship out. So I became a navigation officer for Norwegian Cruise Lines, sailed for 5 years where I met my wife. She was a dancer on the cruise ships. I was an officer. But the divorce rate in the U.S. Merchant Marine is second only to the U.S. Marine Corps, and I respect the statistics, so I figured that was the end of that career. And I came home to Maine, grew up in South Portland, and I started interning for the city of Portland, wanting to find an opportunity for myself on the Portland waterfront. Driven by wanting to stay married and have a family here. And I did want to create something where my friends who I grew up with could come back home to Maine to work. Maine is a BYOJ state. Bring your own job. There's another, let's call that my second bitter root of resentment. It has driven me the last 11 years of being in business here in the state of Maine to create jobs. And that's okay, but there's a right and a wrong way to do that. So founded the company with no contracts and no assurance from anyone. I wrote a study for the city of Portland at the time on how to attract more cruise ships to the city of Portland. This is back in 2008. The only growth that they had since then was in 2001. They had a spike from 21 cruise ships up to 42, and the only reason they had that was because cruise ships were diverted on September 11th from New York City up to Portland, Maine. And I said, well, that's not a great badge of honor, is it? So I created cruise ship fuel-saving itineraries illustrating the fuel-saving benefits of an itinerary that would include Boston, Portland, and Bar Harbor. And if you go back in time to 2007, there was a fuel crisis that just started to loom. And so when we were presenting those to Royal Caribbean and Carnival and these folks, Carnival in particular, was a savings of $200,000 a week. It was real money. So it led to a 40% increase in cruise bookings for the city of Portland, which is about $1 million direct revenue to the city. And I thought, well, maybe someone should be in this business consulting. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not qualified to do anything. But it appeared to me that there was an opportunity, so I founded the company and told people I would consult with them. The director of the Maine Port Authority at the time, John Henshaw, reached out to me and said, I know what you did for the city, I'd like you to do that for the state. So the State of Maine Port Authority contracted me January 1st, 2008. I gave them a contract for $70,000, which I thought was like, I told my wife, honey, we're going to have to get sort of lean here because I was making great money at the cruise ships. And the Port Authority came back to me and said, we can't afford that. So this is BYOJ. Bring your own job to Maine. I said, well, tell me what you can afford. It was $25,000 a year. The first 2 years of starting the business, we had close to 20 foreclosure notices on the house. Had the car repossessed once, got it back. I can tell you that story another time. I remember feeling like a failure at one point when there was no heating oil at the house. The electricity had been shut off. We had a new baby. Our firstborn was born with no health insurance. I can tell you what it feels like to get calls from debt collectors collecting for medical bills. It's about $10,000 to have a baby when you're paying cash. It was a real humbling experience, but I used it the same way I used that guidance counselor moment. I took it as a bitter root, saying, never again. I will provide for my family. That drove me. Again, I would consider that in a selfish way, still, even if justified. It was sort of a selfish way. But around that time, the city of Portland wanted the Maine Port Authority to take over the International Marine Terminal, which was the old Scotia Prince Ferry Terminal. And it was a dilapidated, broken asset. They had no use for it. They had no ships. And it was costing the city about $350,000 a year just to maintain. So the Port Authority came to me and said, can you operate a terminal? And I said, sure. Can't you? I mean, I was one employee. I had some cruise ship experience in my cadet shipping days. I had container shipping experience. But I thought, who couldn't operate a parking lot? So we signed a 35-year lease-to-own deal between the city of Portland and the state of Maine, and started setting a vision for what that should be. Met with all the businesses throughout Maine, that Elohim and Hannaford and the like, the paper mills and fishing community, and said, what do you need to be more competitive in the state of Maine? Long story short there, we've been operating that terminal and growing that terminal for close to 10 years. And if you have a terminal you want to ship, so along the way, traveled out to Iceland to get the Icelandic steamship line Eimskip, brought them to Maine. And that's been a wonderful partnership between Iceland and Maine. It became a gateway for us to the North Atlantic. So you're starting to see how my brain works. I'm going to skip around. So I'm going to fast forward to this slide, right? Ooh, that's weird. It's sort of this halfway. I don't know how that works. You can send it up one. There we are. So, cost-based geography is a theory that I've used to help explain the value of an Icelandic steamship line coming to Maine, okay? When the steamship line Eimskip came to Portland, to the International Marine Terminal, Maine became as close to Tromsø, Norway, which is 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, as we are to central New Jersey, where my wife's family is from. When you go to Logan Airport with $400 in your pocket, you can fly round trip, commuter flight down to Washington, D.C. With WOW Airlines, you might get round trip to London as well. From a cost perspective, you're equivalently close to these two places. In the market, cost is the #1 driving force of all decision making across the board. The difference between Tromsø, Norway, and central New Jersey is that when you fly into Tromsø, where there's 400,000 people north of the Arctic Circle there, in that greater metropolitan area, you fly over a Tesla dealership. The leading selling car in Norway is the Tesla. The middle class income is 6 figures. They pay a lot more for products that we make than we do. When you go to my wife's family in New Jersey, they're not driving Teslas. God love them, but they're not. And they're not willing to pay like $14 for a craft beer from Maine. So, when Eimskip comes to Maine, market opportunities open up where Maine businesses can make a whole lot more money, okay? The neat thing, from my experience, once we realized that that's how it works with shipping lines or with airlines, was this is a huge opportunity for Maine, and it has been, and it's grown 20 to 30% year over year, from that dilapidated parking lot to an asset that Maine businesses like LL Bean, or even New Balance, have been using and growing with. But along the way, I found that the Icelanders and the Norwegians had something that we didn't. They have a way that we don't. Some could say that it comes from, like in Iceland's case, a 1,000-year history of continuous democratically elected parliament. It's the oldest parliament in the world. You could say that the Scandinavians' form of socialism is something that we don't have, but I say we do have it. We have it in the 501c3 tax code of the United States. We've got wonderful opportunities to do social things through our nonprofit world. But what I did find in Iceland and Norway were best practices that we don't have here in Maine. They're about 30 years ahead of us applying value to their coastal resources. That shocked me. In Iceland's case, they had something called the Iceland Ocean Cluster, and they're the only country in the world utilizing more than 95% of their major cod species, cod. What that means is they're getting 7 times the value from the waste byproducts of their fishery than they were with cod as a source of protein, as a fish fillet. That's like saying take the entirety of the Maine lobster industry, multiply the value of it times 7, and that's what you get from using the waste of lobster shell. I felt like there was an opportunity there, another dilapidated parking lot to take advantage of. So I partnered with a gentleman, Thor Sigfusson from Iceland, to create the New England Ocean Cluster, which is one part collaborative work environment, sort of like an incubator space to get people going into, and another part collaborative mindset. And collaboration is something that gives me hope. Too often, I think there's a myopic view that people are competing with each other. What I found in Iceland and Norway was that collaboration was the source of their competitive advantage. They're a free market economy. They're democratically elected governments. But they're way ahead of us in terms of adding value to their resources and fully capitalizing on their knowledge base. It's remarkable. Iceland was one of the poorest countries in the world 35 or 40 years ago. One of the poorest countries in the world. Granted, only 350,000 people, okay? But that's roughly the greater Portland area. Now they're one of the wealthiest countries in the world per capita. They're a fully carbon neutral nation. One thing that spurred Iceland's change was their desperate attempt to save their teenagers from drug and alcohol addiction and early teen pregnancy. That's what I want. That gives me hope. They were the smallest nation in the world to enter the World Cup just this past year. That also came from their response to saving their teenagers from drug and alcohol addiction and early teen pregnancy. They didn't study, they invested. They put money into these facilities, similar to Boys and Girls Clubs, but much, much bigger. They invested in their music programs, their soccer, basketball, and handball programs, so that the students found something cooler than getting drunk or high. The parents all agreed, as a nation, to have dinner with their children every night of the week. The nation agreed to set a curfew. It's remarkable to me because, again, they went from being one of the poorest countries in the world to being one of the wealthiest countries in the world and hitting way above their weight class. And it came in response to brokenness. Ben asked me a few questions. I've totally skipped on my presentation now. I'm sorry. Ben asked me a few questions that I wanted to directly answer. One, what's an issue you care about? Why is it important? What are you doing about it? One is children, for me. My children and your children. One thing I believe is that you can solve all of society's future problems by loving children better and more. A little bit of the right stuff at the right time. I'm doing my part, trying to be a better father and a better husband. That's why I'm leaving early today. To show my wife, be present, show her that I love her. I raced here, came late, because my 6-year-old was having his first basketball game, and he scored his first point. And I'm doing better to be more present. It's not wrong for me to want to see Maine's economy develop. It's not wrong for me to take best practices, be inspired by them, and try to apply them. But there's a right way to do that. It doesn't have to come at this the end justifies the means mentality, where I have to provide for my family come hell or high water and be absent from them in the meantime. So that gives me hope. That's a lesson I've learned. And my children are still young enough for me to be fully present in their lives, to love them, to hopefully help them to avoid some of the pain that they could experience. What else are we doing about it? I'll give you the credential version of this here. With AIMSKIP, we founded a children's charity event every year, just to get the network of companies we work with giving. And we raise $50,000 to $100,000 every year, an annual Scandinavian Christmas party. And we've supported entities like the Center for Grieving Children, Ripple Effect, Learning Works, Cancer Community Center, and this year the Telling Them. And that has been something that's given me hope, because it's easy for me to get into a siloed form of thinking, since my brain is so busy studying itself. But when I go visit the Center for Grieving Children, I'm inspired by the work they do, and I'm distraught by the need for it. And when I look at what Ripple Effect does for disadvantaged kids or Learning Works, I'm inspired. Maine has got so many of these awesome things. We just got to be more aware of them and thread them together. Another thing that I care deeply about is drug and alcohol addiction. Why is it important? Well, we'll never know the great works of art or love or science that could have been coming from the dead who died from needless addiction. I don't think so much scientifically about this as I do spiritually, physically, emotionally. We've got to be present. I think there should be more of a stigma about Facebook addiction and bullying than there is about drug and alcohol addiction. And I think, I'm not stumping for anything here. One thing that inspires me the most and gives me the most hope is brokenness restored. When I meet people who overcome impossible odds, they erase terrible trauma in their brains and in their lives, and they achieve, lovingly achieve, that gives me utter hope. But I think there's a habit I have now of reading every day, finding quiet time, rather than being constantly busy. I'm sure no one else here is busy in the holiday season. And one of the lines that stuck out to me in one of my readings was, change resentments into acceptance, fear into hope, and anger into love. Change resentments. Who do you resent? And what do you resent? Change that into acceptance. How hard is that going to be today? Today's all we have, so I'm just throwing it out there. Change fear into hope and anger into love. I have hope if we all do that. I have hope if Maine does that. I have hope if these students who organize this do that. And I'm grateful as a now present entrepreneur to be doing that myself in my life. So yeah, I apologize for skipping over all of my presentation. I thank you for the opportunity to be here. So thank you. I'll take it.